Russell Brown's a 1 cm gun sight wasn't tracking properly that morning. The reticle, the aiming pipper that should have stayed stable against the target, kept drifting. Not dramatically, just enough that Brown had compensated for it on previous missions over North Korea. Enough that he'd mentioned it to maintenance. The kind of the target area, Sinuiju, right on the Yalu River border with Manchuria. His flight was hunting ground targets, trucks, trains, troop concentrations, standard interdiction work. The F-80 had been doing this for months in Korea. Boring until it wasn't. Someone called out aircraft at 11 o'clock. Brown looked. 6 contacts, single-engine jets, not F-80S. The silhouette was wrong, swept wings, different tail configuration. This was new. American intelligence knew the Soviets had deployed MiG-15s to Chinese bases across the Yalu. Knew they were flying combat air patrol over North Korea. But seeing them and engaging them were different things. Brown's flight had .50 caliber machine guns, 6 M3 Brownings per aircraft, total of 1,800 rounds. The MiG-15 had one 37mm and two 23mm cannons. Also, the MiG was faster. Brown called the bounce. His 4 F-80s dropped external tanks and went after the MiGs. The Soviet, or Chinese, or North Korean, the pilot's nationality remains genuinely unclear from American records. Pilots split. Standard defensive break. Brown locked onto one MiG that committed to a diving left turn instead of climbing, which the MiG-15 could have done easily. The American jet couldn't catch a MiG in a climb. Everyone knew this. But this MiG stayed low. Brown closed to maybe 400 feet. The gun camera was rolling. He fired. The defective sight meant he was aiming partially by instinct, partially by watching his tracers converge. Not ideal. 6 streams of .50 caliber API, armor-piercing incendiary, walking toward the MiG's fuselage. Historians love to call this the first jet versus jet combat kill in history, which is accurate, but makes it sound more climactic than 8 minutes of confusion over the Yalu River with a malfunctioning gun sight. The MiG started trailing smoke, then fire. It rolled inverted and went straight down into the ground northerly. Still frames and official descriptions in Air Force histories. First jet kill. Obsolete American design beats superior Soviet design. Except calling the F-80 obsolete needs context, and calling the MiG-15 superior needs the same. Neither jet was exactly what people claim. The F-80 Shooting Star was already outdated when it reached Korea in 1945. Suit sounded like something from 1918. The original mission, escort B-29 superfortresses deep into Japan against Japanese interceptors. Piston engine interceptors. Zeros, Franks, Jacks. Props maxing out around 400 miles per hour. The P-80 could hit 558 miles per hour straight and level. Massive advantage. Then the war ended. Japan surrendered. The B-29s never needed jet escorts against props because atomic bombs concluded that discussion. So the Air Force had this jet fighter optimized for a mission that no longer existed. Straight wings, subsonic, decent range for a jet, 780 miles combat radius with wingtip tanks, which was remarkable in 1945, but mediocre by 1950. The engine was an Allison J-33, producing 4,600 pounds of thrust, later upgraded to 5,400 pounds in the F-80C model. That sounds impressive until you learn the MiG-15's Klimov VK-1 engine put out 5,952 pounds. Physics matters. The F-80C carried 6 M3 Browning .50 caliber machine guns. Same guns as the P-51 Mustang. 3 in each side of the nose. Total ammunition. 1,800 rounds, 300 per gun. Rate of fire. Roughly 1,200 rounds per minute combined when all 6 fired. Effective range may be 1,000 yards maximum. realistically 400 to 600 yards for reliable hits. The Air Force knew this was marginal armament even in 1948. They'd wanted 20mm cannons. Logistics and production timelines meant .50 cals stayed. Nobody expected the F-80 to dogfight enemy jets. The assumption in 1950 was that the next air war would involve strategic bombing and interception. B-36, penetrating Soviet airspace, Soviet jets trying to stop them. Fighter versus fighter jet combat seemed unlikely. Korea wasn't supposed to have enemy jets at all. I've read multiple Air Force assessments from 1949 to 1950, calling the F-80 a transitional design. That's military bureaucracy speak for, we know it's not good enough, but we don't have anything better in sufficient numbers yet. The F-86 Sabre existed by November 1950. Swept wings, transonic, better guns. But only a handful were in theater. Most fighter squadrons in Korea flew F-80S because that's what was available. Brown's 16th Fighter Interceptor Squadron had been in Korea since July doing ground attack missions. Air-to-air wasn't the priority, which makes November 8th weird. An obsolete straight-wing jet with .50 caliber guns shooting down a swept-wing MiG-15 that was newer, faster, better armed, and designed specifically for high-altitude interception. On paper, this shouldn't have worked. Soviet designers had studied German wartime research, refined it, built something legitimately modern. The F-80 was 1943 thinking with 1948 upgrades. But dogfighting isn't played on paper. The MiG-15 was genuinely good. Not propaganda good, actually good. Soviet designers got their hands on British Rolls-Royce Nene turbojet engines in 1947 through a technology transfer agreement that the British government probably regrets. Klimov reverse-engineered it, added improvements, called it the VK-1. The airframe was all Soviet work. Swept wings, pressurized cockpit, heavy cannon armament. First flight April 1948. Production started immediately. Maximum speed, 668 miles per hour at sea level. The F-80C could manage 580 miles per hour under ideal conditions. Ceiling, 50,000 feet for the MiG versus 42,750 feet for the F-80. Rate of climb, 9,840 feet per minute compared to the F-80's 6,870. Every performance metric favored the MiG, except maybe turn radius at low altitude. And even that was debatable depending on speed and configuration. The armament made American pilots nervous once they learned the specs. 1 Noodleman N-37, 37mm cannon with 40 rounds. 2 Noodleman Richter NR-23, 23mm cannons with 160 rounds total. A single 37mm hit could obliterate an F-80's tail section. The 23mm rounds were equally nasty. Soviet doctrine emphasized heavy-hitting guns over sustained fire. Get one good burst into the target. Meanwhile, the F-80's 6.50 calibers required sustained accurate fire to guarantee a kill. Soviet test pilots praised the MiG-15's handling, stable gun platform, responsive controls at high speed. Some issues with control stiffening near Mach 0.9. But who's dogfighting at transonic speeds in 1950? The jet was designed for bomber interception. Climb fast, hit hard, break away. Against B-29s, it was devastating. North Korea started receiving MiG-15 in October 1950. Chinese units got them simultaneously. Soviet instructor pilots flew many of the early missions, officially as advisors, actually as combatants under radio call sign discipline to hide their nationality. Soviet aviation publications spent 1949 and early 1950 running technical articles about MiG-15 capabilities. Some of this was standard propaganda, but some was justified confidence. They'd built a jet that could contest American air superiority. The strategic implications worried Pentagon planners. If the Soviets could produce MiG-15s in quantity, and they could, the design was relatively simple and robust, then B-29 formations were vulnerable. B-36 formations were vulnerable. The entire strategic bombing concept faced a legitimate counter. American intelligence knew the MiG-15 existed by mid-1950. Blurry reconnaissance photos, defector reports, radio intercepts mentioning the type. But intelligence briefings and combat reality differ. The first F-80 pilots who encountered MiG-15s over North Korea in early November reported something faster and better armed than anything they'd expected to face. Not invincible, nothing's invincible, but worrying. The MiG pilots who flew on November 8th had reason to feel confident. Their jets were superior. American pilots knew it. Soviet advisors knew it. The tactical equation favored the MiG in almost every scenario. Altitude advantage, speed advantage, firepower advantage. Standard Soviet doctrine called for maintaining these advantages. Stay high, stay fast, attack in slashing passes. Don't get drawn into turning fights where the obsolete American jets might equalize things. One MiG pilot on November 8th didn't follow this doctrine. Maybe inexperience, maybe overconfidence, maybe mechanical trouble forced him low. The records don't say. What matters is he committed to a diving left turn at low altitude within gun range of Russell Brown's F-80. Bad decision. Brown saw the MiG commit to the descending left turn and reacted immediately. No committee meeting, no tactical discussion over the radio about optimal engagement geometry. He pitched his F-80 into a pursuit curve and went after it. The engagement lasted somewhere between 5 and 8 minutes, depending on which after-action report you trust. Nobody was checking their watch. The geometry matters here. The MiG pilot turned left and descended instead of executing the smart move, firewalling the throttle and climbing. At altitude, the MiG-15 could walk away from an F-80. Just leave. The American jet couldn't follow above 43,000 feet, even if it wanted to. But this MiG stayed below 10,000 feet, where the F-80's engine performance was closer to competitive. Still not equal, but closer. Brown closed the distance. His airspeed indicator showed roughly 450 miles per hour. The MiG was maybe 480 to 500 miles per hour in the turn, not using its full speed advantage. Brown's flight, his 3 wingmen, engaged the other MiGs somewhere in the area, but Brown focused on his target. Tunnel vision is dangerous in air combat, but also necessary when you're trying to get guns on target. Range decreased. 1,000 yards, 800 yards, 600 yards. The A1CM gunsight reticle kept drifting. Brown compensated. He'd fired this gunsight enough times to know approximately where the bullets would actually go, versus where the sight said they'd go. Not scientific, just experience. At roughly 400 yards, Brown pressed the trigger. 6 M3 Brownings opened fire. The sound inside an F-80 cockpit during a gun run is supposedly deafening, even with the helmet. A hammering vibration through the entire airframe. I couldn't find anyone who described it well. Maybe because describing sounds from 1950 combat missions isn't something pilots prioritized in their debrief. At 1,200 rounds per minute, combined rate of fire, he was putting roughly 20 rounds per second into the air. Distance 400 yards meant roughly half-second flight time for the bullets. Physics and trigonometry happening faster than conscious thought. Hits appeared on the MiG's fuselage. Small, bright flashes. Then smoke. Dark smoke trailing from the engine section. The MiG's turn tightened briefly. Possibly the pilot's last input, possibly control damage. Then fire. Actual flames visible even in daylight. The MiG rolled inverted. Nose dropped. Full-on dive into the ground somewhere north of Sinuiju on the Manchurian side of the Yalu. No ejection. The MiG-15 had an ejection seat. The pilot either didn't use it or couldn't. maybe killed by the .50 caliber hits before the aircraft even started burning. Maybe unconscious from G-forces during the dive. Maybe tried to eject and the seat malfunctioned. Unknown. Brown's wingman confirmed the kill visually. The gun camera footage captured most of it. Brown radioed the engagement to the rest of his flight. Everyone regrouped. They still had a mission, armed reconnaissance over Sinuiju. The MiG engagement was maybe 8 minutes out of a multi-hour sortie. They continued. First jet shoots down second jet. History made. Nobody on site realized the significance immediately, because from Brown's perspective, he'd just shot down an enemy aircraft, which fighter pilots do. The first ever part became clear later when intelligence confirmed film. Frame rate may be 16 frames per second. The MiG fills more of the frame as range closes. You can see the swept wings clearly. The distinctive Soviet star marking on the fuselage. Then the tracers enter frame from the edges. 6 converging streams of .50 caliber ammunition walking toward the target. The MiG pilot had maybe 3 seconds of warning. He would have heard the radio calls from other MiG pilots. Maybe saw tracers in his peripheral vision. Possibly felt the first hits before he understood what was happening. A .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary round doesn't make a polite announcement. It punches through aluminum at 2,800 feet per second. The MiG-15's cockpit was pressurized. That's one advantage it had over early F-80 models. But pressurization means nothing when the fuselage is being perforated by multiple .50 caliber rounds per second. The MiG's armor plate protected the pilot from frontal attacks. Brown attacked from the rear quarter. No armor there. The smoke started from the engine section, probably a fuel line hit. The Klimov VK-1 ran on kerosene, same as American jets. Highly flammable when atomized. The MiG's fuel tanks were in the fuselage center section directly behind the cockpit. One incendiary round in the right place, and you've got an instant fire. The MiG-15's fire suppression system was basic, CO2 bottles that had to be manually activated. 3 seconds isn't enough time to identify a fire, locate the suppression controls, and activate them while pulling G's in a defensive turn. The flames appear in the gun camera footage as bright white blooms against the dark fuselage. They spread fast. The MiG's aluminum skin was thin to save weight. Burns easily once ignited. Soviet designers prioritized performance over survivability, which was doctrine. Attack fast, hit hard, survive by not getting hit. American designers did the same thing. Everyone did. Weight is the enemy of jet performance. The MiG rolled inverted. Could have been intentional. The pilot trying to bail out since Soviet ejection seats in 1950 were crude and unreliable. Easier to roll inverted and drop away from the aircraft. Or could have been control surface damage. Or the pilot already dead from .50 caliber hits to the cockpit. The film doesn't show the cockpit clearly enough to see damage there. The dive was steep, nearly vertical by the time the MiG left the gun camera frame. Impact would have been around 500 to 600 miles per hour. Nobody survives that, even with an intact aircraft. With a burning aircraft disintegrating from structural stress and combat damage, impossible. The wreckage hit somewhere north of Sinuiju. Exact coordinates weren't recorded in American reports, possibly because the impact site was in Chinese territory and inaccessible. Soviet or Chinese recovery teams probably retrieved what was left. Standard procedure. Analyze the damage. Determine what killed the pilot. Figure out what went wrong tactically. I've looked for Soviet records of this specific engagement. Nothing declassified that I could find. The November 8th date appears in Russian aviation histories, but always briefly. First jet combat loss gets mentioned. Pilot name, unknown in Western sources. Some accounts claim he was Chinese. Some claim North Korean. One unverified account claims Soviet. Nationality matters less than the fact that he made a tactical error diving into a turning fight at low altitude against an opponent he could have outrun. Brown fired maybe 200 rounds total. 3 seconds of trigger time. That's what it took. Soviet advisors in Manchuria knew about the loss within hours. The radio traffic alone told them something had gone wrong. MiG pilots used coded call signs, but the pattern was obvious. 6 aircraft departed, 5 returned. The missing pilot never made radio contact after the initial bounce call. What bothers me is a specific radio intercept mentioned in American intelligence summaries from November 1950. The NSA transcript, heavily redacted when released in 1997, shows a Soviet controller at a Manchurian airbase requesting confirmation of aircraft type responsible for the shoot-down. The response was F-80, then a gap in the transcript, then the controller's reply, which translates roughly to verify. Like he didn't believe it. Had to confirm twice that an obsolete straight-wing American jet shot down a MiG-15. This intercept never connects to anything else I could find. No follow-up analysis. No operational changes documented in American intelligence assessments. Just this one exchange showing Soviet disbelief in real time. Dead-end detail, but it stuck with me. The tactical implications were immediate. Soviet doctrine assumed MiG-15 superiority in every engagement category except maybe low-altitude maneuverability. The November 8th kill proved that superiority was conditional. If a MiG pilot abandoned altitude advantage and energy state to mix it up in a turning fight with an inferior aircraft, the inferior aircraft could win. This wasn't news to experienced pilots anywhere, but it was apparently news to some MiG-15 pilots in late 1950. Stalin's personal interest in the Korean Air War is documented. He received regular briefings on MiG-15 performance. The aircraft was a strategic asset, proof that Soviet aviation technology could match or exceed Western designs. One loss to an F-80 wasn't catastrophic militarily, but it was embarrassing politically. The loss couldn't be blamed on equipment failure. The MiG-15 worked fine, pilot error or tactical error. Neither reflected well on Soviet training programs. Soviet advisors increased emphasis on maintaining energy advantage after November 8th. American intelligence noted the change in MiG tactics over the following weeks. Fewer low-altitude engagements, more hit-and-run attacks from above. The MiG-15 used the way it was designed to be used. Slashing attacks. Stay fast. Don't dogfight. Brown's kill didn't change the air war dramatically. MiG-15s continued to be dangerous. F-80 squadrons continued to be outmatched. The F-86 Saber's arrival in December 1950 equalized things. But November 8th proved something specific. Technological superiority wasn't enough. The better aircraft could still lose if the pilot made bad decisions. The Soviet pilot's name remains unknown in Western records. Possibly Chinese, possibly North Korean, possibly Soviet flying under false identity. His death was historically significant only because of timing. First jet versus jet combat kill ever. Otherwise, it was one loss among thousands during the Korean War. The MiG-15 would be shot down 792 more times by war's end. This was just number one. Soviet aviation magazines in 1950 were full of MiG-15 technical articles. Krylia Rodny, Wings of the Motherland, ran a feature in October describing the aircraft's superiority over Western jet designs. Specific performance comparisons, charts showing climb rate advantages, diagrams of the cannon armament. The tone was confident without being obnoxious. Soviet engineers had built something legitimately advanced, and they knew it. The November 8th loss created an internal problem that couldn't be published. Soviet military aviation publications didn't report combat losses, ever. Doctrine assumed readers, both domestic and foreign, should see only successes. MiG-15 invincibility was useful propaganda. admitting an F-80 shot one down contradicted the October narrative. The information stayed classified within Soviet military circles. Pilots were briefed. Tactical adjustments were made. But public acknowledgement never happened. Krylia Rodny continued publishing MiG-15 articles through 1951 without mentioning Korea. American aviation magazines did the opposite. Aviation Week ran Brown's kill as front-page news in December 1950 with gun camera stills. The asymmetry was deliberate. Soviet intelligence tracked American media coverage. They knew the Americans were celebrating. The propaganda value worked both directions. For Americans, this proved their technology could compete even when outmatched on paper. For Soviets, this proved pilots needed better tactical discipline. Same event, different lessons extracted. Internal Soviet assessments from late 1950, the ones declassified much later, show frustration with pilot decision-making. The MiG-15 was designed for specific engagement profiles: high-altitude intercept, boom and zoom attacks, energy fighting, not turning dogfights at 8,000 feet against subsonic jets. The fact that a pilot violated this doctrine and died wasn't a MiG-15 failure. It was a training failure. But explaining that distinction publicly meant admitting the loss happened. Soviet propaganda couldn't do that. So the November 8th kill existed in this weird space, acknowledged privately, denied publicly, known to both sides, but discussed by only one. American psyops tried to exploit this. Leaflets dropped over North Korea in early 1951 mentioned MiG-15 losses to obsolete American jets. The goal was demoralizing enemy pilots and undermining confidence in Soviet equipment. Did it work? Probably not. Pilots trust their own experience more than enemy propaganda. And MiG-15 pilots were racking up B-29 kills by December 1950. One F-80 loss in November didn't change the tactical reality that the MiG-15 was dangerous. The propaganda collision happened mostly in Western media. Aviation magazines loved the David versus Goliath angle. Obsolete American jet defeats advanced Soviet design through pilot skill and determination. Great story, mostly true. The F-80 was obsolete. The MiG-15 was advanced. Brown did win through better tactical execution. But framing it as pure pilot skill ignored the fact that the MiG pilot made a catastrophic error that better training should have prevented. Soviet response to Western coverage was silence. No rebuttals, no alternative narratives. Just continued publication of MiG-15 technical capabilities without combat context. This actually worked reasonably well. Western intelligence couldn't gauge Soviet internal reaction without access to classified briefings and tactical assessments. All they saw was public silence and continued MiG-15 deployment. The historical irony is that both sides were right. The Americans were right that pilot skill mattered. The Soviets were right that the MiG-15 was superior. November 8th didn't disprove either claim. It just proved that air combat is complicated and mistakes are lethal regardless of what you're flying. The MiG-15 would lose hundreds more times over Korea. Final tally by July 1953. 792 MiGs confirmed destroyed by UN forces. The F-80C Sabre accounted for most of those, 379 kills. The F-80 got 6 total. Brown's November 8th kill was the first, but not remotely the most significant numerically. So why does this specific shoot-down matter beyond being first? Because it shattered an assumption before that assumption could calcify into doctrine. The assumption: advanced Soviet jets would dominate obsolete American jets in any engagement. True on paper. Potentially catastrophic if American pilots believed it completely. Brown proved otherwise before the myth became unchallengeable. An F-80 could kill a MiG-15 if the tactical situation allowed it. Not likely, not recommended, but possible. This changed how American pilots approached MiG engagements. Not dramatically. Everyone still wanted F-86s instead of F-80s. But the psychological shift mattered. You're not automatically dead if a MiG bounces you. You have options. Defensive maneuvering might create an opening. The MiG pilot might make mistakes. Survival wasn't guaranteed, but neither was instant death. Soviet tactical adjustments after November 8th actually validated this. MiG pilots became more cautious about low-altitude engagements. They maintained energy and altitude advantages more strictly, which meant they were taking the F-80 threat seriously, even though the MiG-15 was superior. Respect for the opponent's capability, even an inferior opponent, kept pilots alive on both sides. The kill also forced Pentagon procurement discussions. The F-80 wasn't good enough for sustained jet combat. Everyone knew this already, but Brown's kill, and the uncomfortable fact that he nearly didn't get it due to equipment issues, highlighted the urgency. F-86 production accelerated. F-84 deployments increased. The Air Force couldn't rely on pilot skill to compensate for obsolete equipment forever. Brown himself didn't become famous. He flew more missions, got credit for damaging additional MiGs later, survived the war, retired as a colonel. The gun camera footage was his main legacy, proof that the first jet kill happened the way the combat report claimed. No controversy, no disputed claims, just documented history. The Soviet pilot's anonymity bothers me more than it probably should. We know everything about Brown. His squadron, his aircraft number, his post-war career. The MiG pilot is just enemy pilot, nationality uncertain, killed in action, November 8, 1950. Presumably someone in Russia or China or North Korea knew his name. Presumably his family was notified. But that information never reached Western historians. He's historically significant only for dying first. The tactical lesson from November 8th was simple. Aircraft performance matters, but pilot decisions matter more. The MiG-15 could have won that engagement easily. Climb away. Use superior speed and altitude capability. Disengage and reset. Instead, the pilot committed to a low-altitude turning fight against an opponent who specialized in exactly that kind of engagement. Bad decision. Lethal outcome. This lesson repeated throughout Korea. Superior aircraft losing to inferior aircraft because pilots made errors. F-86s occasionally lost to MiG-15s despite having better trained pilots. MiG-15 is routinely lost to F-86 as despite comparable aircraft performance. The 792 to 78 kill ratio, UN forces versus communist forces, reflected training quality and tactical discipline more than raw technology. November 8